So I'll start with Simon. Simon is the director of the film that we just saw, who is an award-winning Swedish director and producer with a track record of creating culturally resonant documentaries that captivate global audiences. His breakout movie, TPB AFK, The Pirate Bay Away from Keyboard, became an international sensation, igniting worldwide discussions on digital rights and internet freedom in 2013. So, come Simon. I'll then introduce Claire Atkin, who is to my left. She's the co-founder and CEO of Check My Ads, the ad tech industry's first watchdog. As a leading brand safety advocate, she is a trusted advisor to Fortune 500 brands, government officials, journalists, and industry leaders. And as a brand safety advocate, she holds the surveillance ad tech industry accountable for abuses against advertisers and consumers in Check My Ads' popular newsletter. So check it out if you're not familiar with it. Welcome. I'll then go to Sean Cruse, who is a senior advisor on research and data with the United Nations Global Compact. The UN Global Compact is a corporate sustainability engagement platform. The organization, comprising issue-specific work streams and local networks in over 70 countries, advances 10 principles based on UN conventions and works with businesses that have committed to support their implementation. Welcome, Sean. And hopefully we'll hear more about the UN Global Compact a little bit later. And then finally, Imran Ahmed, who you've seen on the screen already. He's the founder and CEO of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, or CCDH, and he leads a team of researchers, campaigners, and policy experts who expose and counter the online harms of hate, extremism, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. So welcome, everyone. Well, thank you all for joining this screening and for sticking around for this exciting conversation. This is quite a powerful film, and it's moving, and it has impacts in different parts of the world. I just wanted to note that, hate speech, disinformation takes many different forms, many different shapes in different places in the world for the purposes of this conversation. And at the heels of this film, we'll focus on its impact on democracy and society. With that, maybe I'll start with you, Simon. I don't know where this echo is coming from, but work with it. Maybe you can tell us how you came to this subject matter to begin with, and what got you to want to make this film.
Sure. So this has been a long process for me. This is now 7 years since I started this film. So I've had a kid and a half since I started. And the world is a totally different place, and the internet is a different place as well. But the sort of seed to the story was that at first I wanted to sort of understand and map out who the sort of pioneering architects of online racism were. I wanted to make a film about the bulletin board systems, the internet before the internet. Who were the first who made the first sort of racist websites? So that was my first sort of iteration of the script. And as I couldn't really find any stories, anything to look at, there were no archived footage from these concepts or ideas. So then I met Mead, this fantastic journalist from Sweden, and as she showed me her sort of digital undercover journalism, or digital wall rafting, as we say in Sweden, I was just amazed by her courage, her technical skills, and her methodology, basically. So that's when the film sort of centered. And as we stumbled upon this Nordic Federation that the film sort of digs deeply into, I also wanted to add an element of, I wanted to have an American component in the film. I really wanted to have a US story, because I believe that, since the social media companies mainly are American, I wanted to take it here and show like US audience. what forms hate takes in a country like Sweden, for instance. So the original sort of other sort of idea that got me started making this was that sometime in, I don't know, 2014, 15, 16, as the Swedish old neo-Nazi party, the Sweden Democrats, became stronger and stronger politically, I saw that they were like almost always outperforming progressive parties or the other parties. They always seemed to be better at social media. And I couldn't figure this out. How can they possibly be better at this? And, listening to them, they just said that they were smarter. But so I found this quote somewhere. I read this book and I found this quote. I included in the film as well. And it was this quote that, a lot of people seem to say that, the far right are better at social media, but it's actually social media that's good at the far right somehow. And as I read that, I started throwing myself into that. And that's how I then really wanted to connect with Imran and his fantastic work, and also Annika Collier and Rolling, the true whistleblower. That also, and then the film came together. So.
Thank you for that. And with you, in your opinion, or maybe in your hopes, what is like the audience's biggest takeaway? Is it that we as users need to hold these companies accountable? Or is there something else? What's the message for you, for the audiences that are watching this now?
Well, that's a great line to tell people, hold Facebook accountable, but how do I do that at home on my sofa, like for normal, average, for everybody, we're all online, right? How do we do that? I don't know how we do that, that's why we bring in smart people like you guys. But for me, one of the takeaways is listen to journalists, listen to whistleblowers, protect researchers like Imran, Annika, and me. We need to support them, fund them, and protect them. And we need to listen to them.
That's definitely a much more effective takeaway than Imran, maybe we'll move to you and your body of work. What has been the biggest challenges in getting platforms to act more decisively against hate speech? Is it just lack of resources, lack of willpower, lack of just the desire to do it? What's been just a huge challenge?
Well, the primary challenge is that it's profitable, and telling a company to stop doing something which is immensely profitable is never going to work. The business model is incredibly successful. Mark Zuckerberg is younger than I am. He's worth $100 billion just himself. The companies that we're talking about are worth a collective trillions of dollars in market capitalization. And so why on earth would they change it? Because we asked them nicely. And they live we're talking about a handful of people, a small number, who control an oligopolistic industry, a small number of corporations, Meta, which owns Instagram and Facebook, X, which owns X, Google, which owns YouTube, TikTok. And we're talking about a few executives with enormous power. So how do you change the way that they think? And given that hate, so there was a chart that Mark Zuckerberg put out once, which showed that the closer that on the x-axis is how violative, so how close to breaking the rules content is. And on the y-axis is how much engagement it gets. The further you are from being violative, from breaking the rules of the platform, you get virtually no engagement. You go zero engagement, and then you get suddenly an exponential curve just as you get to the cusp of being violent. Now, what Mark argued was that when you actually violate their rules, they remove it, and so the engagement drops to zero. But we all know that's not true, right? It's not difficult to find content that breaks their rules. So what they found is that stuff is the stuff that really gets people engaged. Andrew Tate, the far-right misogynist, who talks about, tells young men that the only way to have relationships with women is one of domination, violence, and power. And he tells his followers, you need to keep about a third of your followers need to be people that despise you, because they're the ones who actually react to you, telling people how disgusting you are, sending your stuff to other people saying how disgusting, how, look at this guy's an asshole. And they're the ones that actually give you the engagement that leads to amplification. And it's, of course, that second component, engagement equals amplification. Now, in that business model, what we are talking about here fundamentally is an asymmetric battlefield for ideas. So, of course, you can talk about producing good content, you can talk about good research, you can talk about tolerance, and most people are tolerant. Look at our society around us. You don't see people walking around the streets yelling the N-word all the time, maybe in Manhattan. But like every now and then. But for the main part, we don't do that. And why is that? Because the majority of people aren't like that. But on social media, it presents a Hobbesian view of the world, one in which it seems as though everyone is a complete Nazi dickhead. And that's the problem that we face.
I mean, you referenced New York. We are in New York, which means we are in the US, and there is a really significant election right around the corner. And this is to Imran and I, and in fact, I want to invite all panelists to just jump in wherever you feel like it. I'll still direct some questions specifically, but in regards to the upcoming election, what is the risk to democracy and to society if we don't take action against the rise of this far-right movement?
Let me just start by saying that this isn't just about Donald Trump. And you referenced that and clearly we're talking about Sweden here, the Nordic countries, specifically you're looking at. And there is, of course, the rise of extremist parties, both on the right and the left. So my experience was in 2015 seeing the rise of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, the left-wing party that I served in Parliament as a special advisor to politicians. I served them for 8 years until I saw the rise of left-wing anti-Semitism in my party. And simultaneously, we saw the rise of far-right hatred, anti-black, anti-Muslim hatred during the EU referendum on the referendum on whether or not the United Kingdom should remain in the EU, what's called the Brexit referendum. And we saw this massive rise. We also saw the rise of conspiracy theories about election rigging, conspiracy theories about how the EU was importing Muslims to rape 14-year-old girls to destroy the white race. And one individual who believed in that then decided to take a homemade firearm and a knife and shoot, stab, and beat my colleague Jo Cox, who was a 41-year-old mother of 2 to death in her constituency. And so this isn't a unique phenomenon. Looking at Donald Trump atomistically and saying this is about Donald Trump is absolutely, it's a dangerous thing to do, because this is not about one iceberg melting. This is about climate change in our information ecosystem, something profound and fundamental. In the same way that climate change is about the accrual of CO2 in our atmosphere as a result of industrialization, something that no one wants to go back to a pre-industrial era. I don't want to go back to a pre-digital era either. But the negative externality, the toxin produced by the digitization of our economy is disinformation, lies, bullshit. And as that accrues slowly, and lies and hate are inextricably interlinked, every single form of hatred, let's take anti-Semitism as the best example. 2,000 years ago, it's the blood libel. Last century, Hitler believed in the protocols of the Elders of Zion. In this century, it's the Great Replacement theory that J.D. Vance and Ted Cruz and Donald Trump promulgate. And of course, what we see is that those lies and hate, as they accrue in our atmosphere, they are causing systems-wide effects. And the problem is that democracy requires people to have some level of trust in each other, but also trust in information. And that's the second problem, is that it's actually creating epistemic uncertainty and anxiety. We no longer know what's true or not, because there's so much disinformation out there. We just give up. And the one thing I can tell you, my colleague Irina's over there, our Director of Development, and my colleague Sarah, who's our Director of Policy. Irina grew up in the Soviet Union. We talk about this all the time, that the true tool of the tyrant is not lies, it's apathy.
what they do is destabilize the information ecosystem to such an extent that you can't tell what's true or not anymore. You don't know how to find out what's true or not, so you just give up. And that's the real threat to democracy.
To bring it back to the business model, Claire, in the film we see that laid out really nicely and very clearly around how advertising enables and amplifies far-right influencer content. So can you tell us more from the work that you do, which is largely aimed at disrupting the links between hate speech and profit, and why is this specific work extremely important?
Thank you for having me. This is a very special panel. I am so happy to be here with everyone and you, and on a panel for this award-winning film. How exciting. Check my It's such a powerful message, and it's so hard to tell this story with a beginning and an end with the critical characters that were in this film, and I think you all did an incredible job. Thank you, because you framed the problem in a way that now we can talk about the solution. Imran said the problem is that information chaos is going to lead to apathy. Of course, that is true. We started in America, so Check My Ads was a pandemic project. And what we did is we were saying, wait a second, like advertisers the world over have said that they do not want to be associated with racism, bigotry, and xenophobia, and yet the disinformation economy is thriving. This was around 2019, 2020. Leading into the pandemic, COVID-19 disinformation, election disinformation, all this stuff, just blossoming on the internet. And it was funded by ads. So my business partner and I started questioning, advertisers, why are you there? And we'd be at these boardrooms with the departments of marketing and brand and advertising and communications, all 4 different silos within these Fortune 500 companies. And we'd say, what's going on? And they would say, honestly, we don't know. We tell our ad tech providers that we don't want to be there, and then they promise us that we won't be there, and yet you find us there. So what's happening? Well, over the years, we've practiced defunding disinformation. So I'm going to list off some people here who we've taken millions of ad dollars away from. You might recognize some of them. The first is Glenn Beck. Do you remember him? Yeah. The second is Dan Bongino. He looks like Mr. Potato Head. He's on Fox News sometimes. Charlie Kirk, the millennial white nationalist who sent 80 buses full of people to the insurrection. Who else? Tim Pool, the millennial who just got caught taking Russian money. He's on YouTube just asking questions. Tucker Carlson, taking a lot of money away from him in partnership with a few other folks in the accountability industry. A big part of it went to our campaign was about Fox News, because Fox News made Foxnews.com made a ton of ad revenue off of insurrectionist content, and because of our campaign, they changed the brand safety parameters of what they offered to advertisers. So they said, we'll sequester the real unsafe folks away from you. So we're very grateful for that. We've had a lot of success playing whack-a-mole. But the question is, how long are we going to have to play whack-a-mole for? I have one other thing to say before we move on to the next point, but this is the most important thing. The internet, the business of the internet, is why we're here today. And what we see is the facade of chaos and hate. Scams, lies, manipulation. But if you pull back the curtain, what you see is also a chaotic business. Advertisers don't place ads themselves on the internet. They get middlemen to do it for them. But it's not one middleman. It's 4 or 7. And it goes advertiser, ad agency, big ad exchange, medium ad exchange, small ad exchange, tiny ad exchange. What is that? Now that's crazy. And each one is taking a cut, and each one is accountable to no one. The advertiser doesn't know where the ads are going, the publishers don't know what ads they're gonna get, and consumers are getting all kinds of information. So what we need to do is regulate what we call the supply chain. And we're gonna do that. We're already in discussions with all kinds of folks around the world to do this. And we will make the chaos turn down. We will reduce the volume of this, because when you regulate the business, we can start to fix the internet. Thank you.
Jane, what is the role of governance in that work in general?
And this is so exciting, because we're not talking about free speech. We're talking about business. Supply chains, everyone knows what a supply chain is. It's how we get our t-shirts, how we buy cars. Middlemen have been held accountable for years. I have an uncle in Florida. He loves Trump and hates my work. And we were sitting around the table and I said, but Uncle Ron, you don't understand, this is just business. It's business and advertisers should have the right to choose where their ads are going. I said, you're a middleman, right? You're a car dealer. He goes, yeah, I'm a middleman. I said, what's stopping you from selling a lemon to your customers? A car that doesn't work. He said, well, I got the lemon law. I said, what's the lemon law? Because, well, if I sell a car to someone, it doesn't work, they take it to the shop a few too many times within a certain time period, state law, they get their money back. It's the lemon law. Well, we don't have that in ad tech. Interesting. What about fraud? This industry is the second largest industry for organized crime. I'll say it again. It goes drug trafficking, ad tech. That's right. The level of fraud and money laundering in this industry is outrageous. Well, the car industry used to be the same, honestly. The mafia was all over it. So what do? We created the mileage law. We created a know your customer law, which sounds a bit confusing when you're talking about ad tech. But we're talking about know who you're doing business with. If my uncle sells a car to you, he has to take your social security number. He has to put it in his system, and it goes green, orange, or red. If it's green, he sells you the car. If it's orange or red, he's been given a script. He steps out, he says whatever it is to you, steps outside, he calls the cops. You've been deemed a threat to national security. Your SSN was run through Homeland Security, instantly. We don't have that in ad tech, obviously. Russia, China, Iran, this is a national security threat. Domestically too, we don't know who is running the ad tech companies along the supply chain. 20%, we've tried to map it, 20%. We don't know who owns it. We don't know where they're located in the world. So we just need to regulate this. And you know what? We know what to do. We had Enron. We can regulate this like the financial market very, very easily. And I believe we should. Is that too long?
I think it's very informative. And Shauna, I'll pass to you now. And here, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the UN Global Compact and specifically how the standards being set there can have great influence on hate speech online and potentially even our entire experience online.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Again, great film. I really enjoyed it. I do feel like a little bit of like a fish out of water here, so coming from like the UN perspective, and so I have to be very sensitive about what I say about governments or companies and what have you. But
It's a safe space.
I'm just saying. A lot of panelists were talking about accountability to companies, or making sure that companies with putting this like online speech and so forth, that where is that accountability? So the Global Compact has been around since 2000. We're celebrating 25 years next year, and it's a call on companies to make a commitment to principles that are based on UN conventions, specifically around human rights, labor standards, the environment, and anti-corruption. And the companies, when they make the commitment to the Global Compact, are also agreeing to every year providing communication to the UN and to their stakeholders on the progress that they've been making toward that commitment. And to date, we now have over 20,000 companies in 170 countries, I think, that have made this commitment. And we see progress in some areas, but it's not enough. I think it's good that the companies are making the commitment and doing the communication every year to their stakeholders, and kind of following through on that accountability lens. Then I should say that also right now, the UN does stand as one of the places where it's open for all governments and companies to come to the table. Right now, we are kicking off what we're calling a Summit of the Future, which is looking at the progress, or to some extent lack thereof, of the progress that's been made on the Sustainable Development Goals, which has the trajectory to be met by 2030. And the Summit of the Future is looking at new ways that we can leverage new technologies, new approaches to help accelerate toward achieving these goals by 2030. And so yes, and I think I will leave it there for now.
Yeah, I was just curious, what is the blocker for that progress being so slow? 25 years is a significant amount of years. What has blocked just from the perspective of the Global Compact, what has blocked the escalation of the progress thus far?
Mm-hmm. I think what we see as the opportunity space is that we want multiple stakeholders to work together, governments, private sector, NGOs, and so forth. And I think one of the blockers has been just not seeing that total cohesion amongst the different stakeholders and working together toward achieving those goals. And then also too, I think that there's a certain extent of a lot of companies want make a commitment but then don't necessarily follow through with it, and so it's just trying to again hold accountability for companies in terms of the progress.
Thank you. And in addition to Global Compact, your particular research or person work focuses on AI.
Mm-hmm.
And AI is sort of the formula that makes some of hate speech and the spread of it possible. And we've seen how that can play out in a really negative way via this film, and maybe we are very aware about these negative influences, but is there any good news with AI? Is there anything in the technology that can actually be leveraged to stop hate speech or to stop misinformation instead of just spreading it?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. What we are finding in the report that we've just released this week is that AI is being leveraged to sort of streamline exactly the whole accountability and reporting frameworks. And so there's a number of good examples from companies that are providing these tools so that companies can start having a better handle on their supply chain and in a formatted, templated way. And so that is one example. It sounds kind of lame, but it's pretty influential, especially if it's being utilized by some companies that have influence and spheres around the world in different countries. And then also too, there's been some really interesting examples of leveraging AI for, reaching rural areas and societies through electric vehicles and farming and there's some good stuff there.
Well, thank you. I will maybe pause from my end and open it up for the audience for any questions for any of the panelists. There's a question.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, thank you so much, everyone. This has been amazing. I was just thinking back to some of the stuff that's come up in the film, but I think also one of you brought up Imran, it might have been you. And I'm just thinking about the link between specifically racist hate speech and violence and misogynist hate speech and violence. Obviously, on an individual level, we've seen through the film that there's a link, for example, to domestic violence with some of these figures. But I'm wondering if you see like the same patterns or slightly different patterns between like the racist sphere and the misogynist sphere in terms of how the information spreads. Like, do they look exactly the same? Are there some noted differences in how they spread? Yeah, any insights would be great.
It's a really interesting question you ask, and I think the simple answer is yes. There's a tight relationship. So when I was studying civil rights, I worked with a guy called Eric Ward, who's the former CEO of the Western State Center. He's a former SoCal African-American civil rights organizer who then moved up to Oregon to work on the emerging Pacific Northwest neo-Nazi movement. I have attended a Klan rally with him and visited the base in Spokane, which is a white supremacist version of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is literally the Arabic for the base, so they style themselves in homage to Al-Qaeda, but base themselves in Spokane, nice place. And he's really interested in the symbolism, the semiotics, the language, the symbols that are used to transmit hate. And he always said anti-Semitism, that the semiotics of American hatred are based on anti-Semitism. You scratch any racist, you find an anti-Semite. That's not necessarily true in the social media age. In the social media age, thinking about the contingent circumstances in which those environments emerged, young men sitting, young sort of geeky guys sitting in their basements. Misogyny is the original sin of internet hatred. You scratch any racist online, you find misogyny there. And to such an extent that it has re-socialized the presentation of white supremacy around the world. It is increasingly about white male supremacism. And there's an atavistic element to it, the trad wife movement, there's all sorts of things. But actually, when you look at the Proud Boys, for example, one of the first, the most prominent modern fascist movement in the United States, and it is explicitly white male chauvinist. It's about, about extreme misogyny, and we've done work looking at incel movements. We've done work looking at hate movement. We've done work looking at, a whole bunch of climate deniers, people who undermine sexual and reproductive rights. Underpinning it all is a genuine hatred of women. And I will say that, one of the best avatars of that right now is Elon, who believes that most of the women in this audience are basically breathing chambers. Because we need to increase the population so that he's got more people that can work at a 0 hours contract at his factories. So, that it is changing the nature of extremism, and misogyny is, as you say, at the heart of it.
Elon's trying. Imran's trying to get sued again.
we beat him last time, we'll beat him next week if he does it again. The irony is he sued us in order to find out who funds us and also to scare away funders from funding us. Sued us in 2023? 3, right? We've quadrupled our revenues since he sued us. And he personally, because we actually won a SLAPP ruling, a strategic litigation against public participation ruling in California, he is now individually our biggest funder.
Other questions from the audience? No. There's one.
Thanks. Hi. First of all, excellent film. I really enjoyed it, and I would just basically, I'm Black American, not immigrant background, And just a quick statement and then a question for you. I did not grow up knowing a lot about the white supremacist ideologies in Scandinavia. I've been to Denmark, Copenhagen a couple times, had a great, wonderful experience, nice, friendly people. I would hear little things about, you had the Norway shooting, then they had a story about the, lead singer, one of the members of Ace of Base doing the white, song about killing the black people and stuff. So it's like, you hear little tidbits here and there. And I also found it really ironic that a lot of white supremacists utilize a lot of like Scandinavian symbolism, like, Norse mythology and, so now, Vikings, Freya, Odin are now symbols of white supremacist ideology. And I had a question. One, how is a white identity in Scandinavia viewed, and do you also try to go after the ideology, not just when it's from the far right? Because basically in the United States, I think it's very hypocritical that we tend to only have this really partisan view of white supremacy. Like, obviously, Trump has been very open about a lot of things that he's done, but no one discusses on the left about Joe Biden's affiliation with a KKK member, or both, Harris and Biden both have a lot of anti-black policies that they've enacted, throughout their career. So I was wondering, basically, do they try to teach, to try to stop the ideology at a young age? Do they teach children in school, like, maybe, have like understanding about different cultures, or is it only when it's like extremists do they send and acknowledge it?
Okay, I'll start with the first part. Great question about Swedish identity. So, and also I live very close to Denmark, so the next time you're in Copenhagen, hit me up. Sweden has this weird place in the minds of far-right extremists all over the world, I think. But, especially in America, I'd say that we, on one hand, we are like Bernie Sanders' favorite society in the world. We're like this sort of lefty, libtard, feminist, horrible people. But then, and from some other point of view, we are this sort of uber blonde, like blonder than the Nazi Germans, like original white people, type of stuff, where we are being hailed as, whatever, a fantastic white nation or whatever. So they have a weird relationship to Sweden. It's like, it's a little bit complex. But I'd say that today, when Swedes are black and brown, and Swedes are like not just blonde and blue-eyed anymore, it's the rise of the far right has sort of, as Sweden has become more diverse, the rise of the far right has sort of also been. Sweden has been a very used to be a very homogenous country up until the Second World War. So when we had a lot of influx of immigrants from the 1950s and 60s and onward, and the social democratic project that is Sweden had a very sort of open door policy to immigration, and that's why Sweden became one of the countries that were easiest sort of to get citizenship in and to come to for seek asylum in and so forth, and has been for a long time. And I think that in the past 10 years or so, we've seen these two factors: the fact that Sweden has had this very open door, and the fact that Swedes no longer are only blue-eyed and blonde, has sort of triggered these, racist parts of society that are using the internet to cause division. So I'd say that many, like the way that the Sweden Democrats, which is a confusing title for Americans, this far-right party in Sweden, the way that they're using this old idea that Swedes are blonde and Swedes are blue-eyed, that's been like so heavily projected now through the internet, and and it's and then the fact is that Swedes don't look like that anymore. I have non-white children myself, and I think that it's one of the things that is so important for me making this film is to sort of talk, sort of show this. How should I put it? to show that the Swedish, identity is forever changed and we'll never go back to blonde and blue-eyed. So that's sort of how I feel, or how I look at that. I hope that was an answer to your question. Thanks.
Is that the reason for the far-right?
Sorry.
Hi, thank you everyone. Congratulations, it's a great film. I have a very concrete question. At least twice, 2 times you had access to the coordinates of Vincent in Russia and in the woods in Norway. So at that point you were filming, did you consider attending the Halloween party, or like what were the limits during the research?
That's a good question. Both of the times, the first time Vincent actually shared the coordinates, and that's what we thought it was so cool that he actually shared the actual coordinates. We found these coordinates in a feed a year after we had the party, so we didn't really get the invitation in time to go there ourselves. But if we had, we wouldn't have gone there because of me and because of me becoming a mother during the filming during the process, during these 7 years. Me, the main character, also became a mother, and she started looking differently at her personal security, and we decided quite early on that we wouldn't go and knock on the golden one's door, or we wouldn't actually go home to people. And same thing with Vincent, the character that we investigated all through the film. We decided not to travel to Brazil and confront him there with a camera. So those were some choices we made.
Excuse me, what happened to the cat?
Oh, that's the favorite question. Always comes up. We don't know what happened to the cat. We know what the name of the cat is, but I can't tell you. But the Norwegian, it's there are a lot of stories about Vincent that I can't tell you because it came from, his girlfriends basically. He had a lot of girlfriends. And for protecting the witnesses and protecting the people that have told us the stories about Vincent and his life, there were a lot of stories that we couldn't share. But the Norwegian neighbor that you meet in the film believed that the cat is dead.
Oh.
Great, sorry. Well, first, thank you so much, each one of you, for all the work that you do. I think it's really important, and like you guys said earlier, that this film provides a place to speak about it, right? And it gives a way for solutions, which you guys are all providing. But what can you give us as information to do on our part, the people that are frustrated, dealing with people on a personal level of misinformation, people that are misinformed? How do we deal with these people in our daily lives?
Everyone in this room has someone about whom you're speaking, I think. Thank you for that question. It's so important. I think it's so relieving to know that this is a business model. That our neighbors are not our enemies. And not strategically. If someone's gone down a rabbit hole, if they're believing conspiracy theories, or they become radicalized towards bigotry and hatred, yeah, you can deal with them as creatively as well as you can while keeping yourself safe. And I think that really depends on the situation. But it is so helpful to know that we can actually go up the pipes and fix the problem at the top. And I think it's important to remember that our enemies in this fight, and it is a fight.
And it just gets to show that, you see something frequently enough, you think it's probably likely to be true. It's something called the illusory truth effect in our psychology. And when people see a story that comes up on a platform that, remember I told you, is asymmetric and it benefits contentious, hateful disinformation, they see something about how dangerous Muslims are every single day on their feed. They're not clocking it actively. They're looking at pictures of their friends, pictures of a rabbit, pictures of cats. Well, cats, really, really pissed off about that. And then they see something about how Muslims are doing this to white women, or they're doing that, or they're dangerous, or they're terrorists. it's almost rational to conclude at the end of the year, this is a real problem with Muslims and no one's really talking about it on the main news and everywhere else. That's how the drip of disinformation works, to recolor the lens through which people see the world. And so when you're dealing with those individuals, first of all, come from a point of humility. Second of all, when it's people you know, and this is not the systems-wide effect that you and I work on a policy level, and we're doing the UN Summit for the Future and the UN General Assembly on Sunday. In fact, we're doing a 2-hour session that my team's been organised. That's all the policy stuff, the hard stuff. On a human level, one-to-one, start with love. It starts with a connection. The only way to bring someone back is with carrots, not sticks. Sorry for the pun. But you need to start with a level of understanding and then help them to find their way back. And the truth is that with disinformation, let's take pandemic disinformation, for example, about vaccines. What we always said was, the best way to counteract that is actually the individual relationships that people have with their physicians, with their primary care physicians who looked after them and their family for years and years. The solution to systemic disinformation starts with relationships.
What I was going to say, we maybe have time for one more question. So, and the person already has the mic. So, sorry, everyone. But we will have drinks afterwards, so you can still ask everybody questions.
Thank you. I wanted to thank you for the fascinating film and great conversation. What I resonated a lot with is interesting exploration of identity, particularly around Vincent, but also I think me is also represented in the same exploration. And also in terms of the dichotomy between both me and Vincent around fluidity and understanding how that can shape and be molded in so many different ways. I really found it quite intriguing exploring all of Vincent's past. But then there's a moment in the film where he is also reflecting on how, in the search for affirmation, he became such an easy target. So, question for the panel is, we've discussed a lot about general society as such, and then now more deeply around individual relationships, and you mentioned love. But how do we better detect when someone who went from a DJ, bisexual, whatever it may have been, goes down this very dark path? What is the moment between being potentially judgmental versus actually trying to take action that's going to prevent someone going down that path?
For me, it's the moment they get paid. The moment they get a paycheck. I mean, the Venn diagram between hate and grifting is almost a circle. There has to be a reason for it. Yes, some people are hateful because they've learned to be hateful, but they're single cells, right? And they're a problem for whatever community they're in until they get paid, until they figure out the grift that radicalizes other people, and then it becomes a cult. And that's exactly what we saw here. It's what we have seen over the last couple of weeks with the story about how Russia was paying YouTubers to a lot of money, like in some cases $100,000 per one video to spread Russian propaganda in America. And it's certainly the case with automated, self-serve ad technology companies. Any one of us can start a YouTube channel and get it monetized within a few weeks. Where were you? I think that's the moment where it starts to tip when we, compassion only goes so far. At a certain point, you have to cut them off.
Well, on that note, we would love to come just because this was